Democracy is the worst form of government apart from all of the alternatives. Even when Winston Churchill said this almost 80 years ago, he himself admitted that the line was so old that nobody really knows who said it first. He also said that the greatest argument against democracy was a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And, well, maybe he had a point. And even that is assuming that the system was working as intended with everybody voting in line with their own interests. One of the most consistently frustrating problems in finance and economics is people being told about policies that would work against them, and then supporting them anyway. Of course, all of you are probably thinking of some specific examples right now, but it happens almost everywhere. Farmers voted for a policy that would destroy farming, homebuyers rules to make homes more expensive, and small business owners for laws that overwhelmingly favor big businesses. But why do we keep doing this? Well, the answer may simply be that our dumb human brains are really good at being told what we want to hear. We aren't indebted workers. We are investors, entrepreneurs, high-end professionals, and most importantly of all, middle class. It sounds silly, but once you notice it, you will see how it works every single time. Oh yeah, and it probably doesn't help that we are indeed getting more stupider too.
Farmers may be forced to sell their crops at steep losses now that China, once the largest buyer of U.S. soy exports, is retaliating against U.S. tariffs.
Hope customers understand, when suddenly it's, 25 cents more for a cup of coffee or for a latte.
Small businesses, though, are facing mounting pressure from America's affordability crisis.
I grew up thinking about the stereotypical American dream where you own a house and you have a yard to play in, and I think that dream is dying.
Do you ever feel like you were surrounded by people who can't follow basic instructions, use simple intuition, reason, or even think beyond the next few minutes? Well, you might not be imagining things. There has been a marked rise in cognitive difficulties over just the last decade. If you haven't noticed this decline, well, I might have some bad news for you. The rate of young people reporting trouble learning new things, concentrating, or just thinking has almost doubled over the past 20 years. But it really shouldn't be like this. For the last 200 years, humans on average have been getting consistently smarter with every passing generation. Around the world, we have more access to information than ever before, better nutrition, and we are now spending more on education than any point in history. But that can only get us so far. Whether you want to blame it on brain rot short-form content, AI that does the thinking for us, the defunding of public education, symptoms of long COVID, or the fact that nobody can get a decent night of sleep anymore, the data is all saying the same thing. We might have already passed peak intelligence, and we are now getting progressively stupider. So then, what happens when we build a world that's too smart for us to use? Measuring intelligence is really hard. There are standardized tests to assign intelligence quotients, or IQ. But for most people, there are some problems with reducing someone's mental capacity to a single number. Most IQ tests that are actually performed under properly controlled conditions are done to diagnose suspected learning disabilities or cognitive impairment, which means the sample group is naturally going to be people that already demonstrate impaired mental capacity. Anybody else that actually goes through the effort and expense of completing a controlled condition IQ test is naturally going to be the type of person that cares way too much about it and studies beforehand in validating the results. IQ tests can give you some useful data though. If someone brags about their IQ, they are an idiot. But with a large enough sample size, some generalizations can still be made. James Flynn was a researcher who collated data which was aggregated over decades to identify the Flynn effect. Since 100 IQ is supposed to represent the median score of a test taker, he noticed that bell curves had been adjusted over time, with large testing groups indicating that subsequent generations were getting smarter. On average, a cohort 10 years younger would be 3 IQ points more intelligent than the group that came before them, and this trend continued for the 6 decades he was active. But even with such a clear trend, there was not one single cause that experts in the field could agree on. Most concluded that it was a combination of factors including more efficient schooling, the reduction in infectious diseases in early childhood development, a more stimulating environment as people moved into larger community centers, the widespread realization that inbreeding was not the best idea, and the fact that we decided to stop putting lead in our gasoline. There are also many experts that simply argue that the data is too unreliable to draw any definitive conclusions over these timeframes. Whether it was one or all of these factors, it can only get us so far. Most of Flynn's observations ended in the early 2000s, so he wasn't around to see the current decline that researchers are noticing across the globe. But there were a few countries that were ahead of the trend. From 1962 to 1991, scientists studied nearly 750 Norwegian men who completed an intelligence test as part of their mandated military conscription. The scientists noted a statistically significant boom and bust over the measured time period, with average intelligence reverting back to the levels it was over 30 years ago. This decline started in 1970, so you might think it disproves the theory of leaded gasoline. But Norway never actually used it nearly as much as we did here in the United States of small block Chevys. They instead used something called public transport, which primarily ran on diesel or electricity. One of the theories that researchers put forth was that in an advanced economy with education around and access to birth control, dumber people were just having more dumb babies and smart people weren't keeping up. They call this dysgenic fertility, but I prefer to call it the idiocracy theory. However, given Norway's relatively homogeneous and small population, the scientists were able to control for family groups through generations, and the results were the same. Dumb people were having dumber kids, but smart people were also having dumber kids. This meant that the dumbing was coming from the environment rather than being passed down, which was strange because over this time period, Norway was enjoying large material wealth increases from a sharp increase in oil and natural gas resources. Ultimately, the strongest factor that researchers found in the existing population was educational systems that had become overly focused on rigid curricula, distracting TV and media, as well as worse nutrition from overly processed and sugary foods. So yeah. If schools that look like this, color televisions that looked like this, and the occasional fried fish undid decades of worse intelligence gains in Scandinavia, it's time to learn how money works to find out exactly how cooked we are in the age of brain rot content, crumbling education systems, and high fructose corn syrup. This video is sponsored by Storyblocks. We use a lot of footage in our videos, and if you've ever bought stock clips individually, you know how expensive that can get. That's where Storyblocks comes in. It gives us unlimited downloads of high-quality, human-made stock video, music, sound effects, and templates, all for one predictable subscription cost. Whether we need cinematic B-roll, motion graphics, or the perfect background track, Storyblocks has everything in one place, making our workflow faster and more affordable. Plus, everything is royalty-free with clear-cut licensing, so we never have to worry about copyright claims. You can even whitelist your YouTube channel directly in your account to help prevent music claims, which is a feature exclusive to Storyblocks. If you want to start making videos like ours and build your own business, a Storyblocks subscription is the perfect place to start. Head over to storyblocks.com/howmoneyworksuncut, and they're offering 15% off any annual plan for a limited time. That discount is only available through my link. Okay, maybe the biggest question is why we are only now noticing a decline in intelligence. There are factors that have increased our intelligence and factors that have made it worse. And for a while, the good stuff was more than compensating for the bad stuff. But that is starting to change. When was the last time you felt bored or even slightly mentally challenged? Probably not for a while, right? Technology has put the world's information in our pocket along with basic tools like a calculator and an automatically updating global map. I don't want to make myself sound too old here, but in the past, most cars had a big book of streets in the trunk that you had to look through to figure out manually which turns to take to get to a destination. It wasn't exactly rocket science, but it took a bit more intuition than plugging a destination into a phone and letting Waze to the wheel. Researchers have noted that offloading these simple everyday problem-solving tasks means our brains aren't as exercised as much as they were even 2 decades ago. The spike in recorded cognitive challenges amongst 18-year-olds from the Monitoring the Future survey did start around 2012, right as fully capable smartphones were entering the mainstream. Easily accessible technology started to do the thinking, so we didn't need to. But that by itself wouldn't have actually been a problem. Yeah, nobody these days knows how to read a paper map, but we also don't know how to churn our own butter or read a sundial either. Technology has been making mental skills irrelevant for a lot longer than we have been getting dumber. The difference now is that mindlessness is the goal. This new wave of technology has not only taken away minor inconveniences that could be overcome with a bit of critical thinking, it's also replaced it with easy, instant contentment. It's no secret that the competitive meta of the world's largest technology companies is to keep you engaged with their platform as long as possible. Endless scrolling, tailored content on demand, engagement metrics, echo chambers, dopamine loops, time-sensitive rewards, and push notifications are just some of the tricks, and it really does work. For user-generated content platforms, the companies themselves don't even need to try that hard. They just push the content that someone else figures out how to keep engaging. As a disgusting, low-life influencer, I am 100% guilty of that myself. I need that watch time too. For example, I spent hours refining the opening hypothetical question of this video. The one about you feeling like you were surrounded by dumb people. It's unfortunately relatable, it makes you think, and it probably made you feel just a little bit smug. all things that are good for engagement, but are also kind of bad for challenging our minds. Humans are not made to be constantly contented, and if we are, it makes it really hard to give up the easy dopamine to commit to something challenging and not immediately rewarding, like studying, learning a new skill, or just sitting down to get some work done. AI is shaping up to be the ultimate incarnation of this trend, where people don't have to think about challenging problems and just get maximum stimulative output from minimal input. Now, I am not a psychologist, and even though I spoke to a few and read a few papers when putting this video together, there are simply better people to discuss the exact mechanisms of brain rot. So instead of making a video about the Cocomelon to Skibidi Toilet to Aiden Ross pipeline, there is something else more important to address. What happens when we are too dumb to use a world built by smart people? It sounds like a silly question, but it is literally already happening. We are now spending more on college than ever before, and the rate at which people are getting these expensive degrees is also higher than ever since it's become increasingly essential to land basically any job. The result of all of this education is that we apparently have a massive gap in technical skills that young people entering the workforce aren't able to fill and aren't willing to train into. Now, sometimes that's because the pay is simply not worth it, but they don't like to say that part out loud too much. Okay, so businesses complaining about not being able to fill underpaid hands-on roles is not exactly breaking news, but there is a surprising trend emerging from the computer-addicted generations entering the workforce. They aren't that good at using computers. Modern computers have become so refined and user-friendly that people who have grown up using smartphones and iPads aren't as savvy as older generations who grew up using LimeWire and loading mods onto their pirated copy of Age of Empires. Commercial IT tools in most companies are still fairly old and utilitarian. They have a lot more in common with the home computer experience of the 2000s than the smartphones of the 2020s. Formal education programs are also not equipping labor force entrants with these foundational skills because they are largely even further behind. A survey conducted by Dell, the computer maker, found that more than a third of Gen Z admitted to not being adequately prepared to use computers in the workforce. Eventually, this could become a massive problem, because even those lovely user-friendly computer programs rely on a foundation of technical adeptness to build. It's a big challenge from 20 years ago, but some of the most skilled people in the world of technology are now the 50-plus-year-olds that wear socks and sandals and have been working on computers since MS-DOS. Technology companies have made this even worse for themselves, because there is a not-so-secret ageism problem amongst the trendy companies that have actually seen declining numbers of older workers even though the population is getting older overall. Now, most of the big tech companies will be fine. They can hire people who have specifically trained to work with technology, but regular companies that have grown used to people entering the workforce with a basic knowledge of computer systems are increasingly running into problems already. And this goes well beyond computers as well. It actually gets way dumber than that. The rush to make everything as user-friendly as possible means less people are reading, choosing to consume purely audio and visual media instead. The Financial Times, that wrote the article about moving past peak intelligence, called this a decline towards a post-literate society, a hypothetical society in which multimedia technology has advanced to the point where literacy is no longer necessary or common. So why are we just noticing this now? Well, we aren't. We are just feeling the consequences of it now. All the way back in 1985, Neil Postman, a media professor, published the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he spoke about the influence of showmanship in public discourse. Basically, the book saw the trend of television consumption taking over from newspapers, and theorized that in the future, the truth would matter a lot less than what narrative was more entertaining. It would also create a world where the people with the resources and expertise to make things entertaining and easy to consume would have a lot more influence than the people who took the time to report things factually. Again, this book was written in 1985, and ironically, it never actually sold that well, because it is quite dense and full of facts and figures. Now, if anybody should have known to present this information in a TikTok dance, it should have been him, but these warnings were largely ignored. Now, this book is still fascinating, and some of the predictions are downright scary, and if you want a bit of light horror, I will link a link to it like I always do in the description below. Postman wrote 2 other books on the subject as well: Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology, and The End of Education, Redefining the Value of School. These both came out in the early 1990s, so there is a good chance this guy might have been a time traveler. Now, there is one other factor at play here that is a lot more straightforward. Yes, young people might have been blasted by brain rot since birth, but we are also on average simply getting older. Cognitive function naturally drops off as we age, and the average American is now almost 40. As we are living longer lives than ever before, a lot of elderly people well past their mental prime have refused to give up senior positions in government and business. Oh, and those same elderly people are also spending the most on lobbying to keep those young, stupid kids away from power. $3.5 billion were spent on political lobbying in 2019 alone. What's more is that political donations that funded presidential campaign ads topped $14 billion. These astronomical sums are not reserved for the highest echelons of federal politics either. Every year, vast fortunes are spent on influencing policy decisions from the Oval Office and Congress all the way down to local city councils. But why is this allowed? Political lobbying combined with huge campaign contributions from wealthy individuals and companies has started to seem tantamount to bribery, where the best interests of the voting public are seconded to those who write the biggest donation check, fundamentally undermining the democratic process, right? Well, it's time to defend the indefensible by learning how money works to influence politics, and why we should want it to stay like this. Now, before we get into the actual arguments in favor of political lobbying and campaign contributions, we need to get one thing out of the way. That is, that all of this is the law. The First Amendment, as discerned by the US Supreme Court, protects politicians and their supporters' right to speak freely on political issues and in support or opposition of political individuals, parties, or ideas. The right to free speech extends to using any legal means necessary to promote those ideas as loudly as possible. Now, whether spending money really counts as a form of speech is still a bit contentious, but hey, the Supreme Court, with the decisions in the landmark Citizens United and Buckley v. Vallejo cases, have kind of expressed that money in politics is a form of speech. Setting all that aside, let's explore why, constitutionally mandated or not, this whole process might still be a really good thing. So, to get started, we need to make a distinction between political lobbying and political donations, because they are two separate things. Political donations are pretty straightforward. It is the financial contributions paid to a political party or candidate for them to use on their election or re-election campaigns. Political lobbying is a little bit different. It involves special interest groups operating to actively sway the decision-making process of a politician, a party, or the entire government. It sounds pretty nefarious on the surface, but think of it like this. If you've ever attended something as simple as a town hall meeting to voice your opinion on what should happen to abandoned Lot 48, well, you've engaged in political lobbying. Political lobbying does not need to involve money at all, and it normally doesn't. But the larger special interest groups that take lobbying much more seriously will normally be funded by large institutions or extremely wealthy individuals. This money will be used for a few things. It will normally be used to create some kind of awareness about the group. It will be used to pay off office facilities, and it will be used to pay the salaries of people that basically turn complaining in a public forum into a full-time job. Of course, this money can also be used for donations. Now, technically, this can't be transactional. An agreement of something like $200,000 for a yes vote on an upcoming bill, that would be illegal. But that's where the marketing from earlier comes in, because lobbyists really walk this rule right up to the line. If a special interest lobbying group named Americans for Lower Taxes makes a contribution to your political campaign and you later publicly vote to support a new capital gains tax legislation, well, it should be pretty obvious that you aren't getting any more donations from them in the future, and chances are they will probably fund the opponent instead. Good luck. The types of people that can afford to fund these organizations tend to have a different objective than the common man, and sometimes those objectives would even be at odds with what the majority might want. So, obviously, this is a pretty gross misuse of financial dominance to subvert the outcome of the democratic process, right? Well, not necessarily. For starters, a good chunk of this money still does come from regular people.
I am once again asking for your financial support.
But more so than that, these organizations are actually limited on how they can make these donations. Right off the bat, the federal law does not allow corporations to donate money directly to political candidates, so they need to find alternatives. So what they do instead is use what's known as soft money. These institutions will pay to have a presence in Washington, and a working personal relationship with lawmakers through their agents. These agents can work as experts on certain issues and even draft legislation for lawmakers to put before Congress. Again, this might sound bad, but in reality, our political system relies on these agents to operate effectively. I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of lawmakers are f***ing stupid.
But I'd ask you, how does that show up on a 7-year-old's iPhone who's playing a kid's game?
Congressman, iPhone is made by a different company.
A majority of them are ex-lawyers at best, or cranky old businessmen looking for something to do in retirement at worst. Imagine you put the issue of something like encrypted data collection in front of your grandparents to debate over, and you might start seeing the issue. Sometimes these guys have no idea what they are legislating. For what it's worth, that's fine. It's impossible to expect all these lawmakers to be experts on all things, which is why they are free to ask for help. A political lobbyist from the tech space will be able to explain in-depth ramifications of a proposed piece of legislation. They will also be able to speak about this using the kind of legal jargon that only lawmakers, lawyers, and judges really understand, but is still important for creating robust legislation. Of course, these lobbyists are paid by the tech companies, so they will always try and spin any proposal in favor of the tech companies they represent. But lawmakers know this, and a good ongoing relationship requires a bit of honesty from these lobbyists, otherwise these politicians aren't going to ask for their help anymore. Now, you might say, well, why don't we just pay to have public expertise advise politicians in order to take out the special interests of these pieces of advice? And you might be able to guess it. That would be really expensive. People that are qualified enough to speak with confidence on the legislative process while also being experts on topics ranging from technology to medical research all the way up to environmental sustainability attract fat salaries. You would also need lots of them, because not all of them are going to be experts on all issues. You would also need enough to go around between all of the lawmakers considering an important issue. It's just not feasible. But perhaps all of this is skirting around the main issue. As hard as I try and defend it, there are loopholes in place that allow massive piles of money to flow into election campaigns that are costing more money than most people's entire extended family will see in 100 lifetimes. Okay, but consider the alternatives. There are a few options here. State-funded election campaigns, exclusively self-funded campaigns, or no funding allowed at all. Let's start with the last one. Some groups have floated the idea of eliminating campaign funding altogether. Instead, candidates would be invited to attend a series of public forums where they could debate issues, and that would be the extent of the process. The problem here is that it disproportionately favors incumbent lawmakers, because they will be the person that the people know. By the same logic, it also favors people who have a strong public image outside of politics, i.e. celebrities. And if there's one thing we don't need, it's more celebrities in politics. It also doesn't necessarily stop someone else with a big audience swinging the result of an election. Think of someone like Casey Neistat, who made 2 videos supporting Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in their respective presidential elections. Casey was well within his right to do this, of course, First Amendment and all that good stuff, but he could get that message out to millions of potentially undecided voters, and if actual politicians didn't have a platform to share their counterargument, well, then politics would quickly turn into a game of who has the most famous friends. Well, okay. What if instead, the government gave these candidates a budget they could spend any way they like on promoting their campaign? Sure, it might cost taxpayer dollars, but maybe that is worth it to get corporate influence out of politics. The problem is, how do you distribute this money? You could distribute it to parties based on the seats they currently hold in government, but this can cause drastic and irreversible chain reactions that favor one party over another. If one party has a really good election cycle, they would get more money in the next election, and likely win more seats, which would give them more money in the election after that, and so on until they control the entire government. The other alternative is to just give money to every candidate, but this causes other issues. Mostly, people just running for office to get money from the government. Now, some states actually run what are called clean elections, which is basically what has been described here. And this problem of non-serious competitors is a really big deal. If this became widespread enough, people could just make it their full-time job to run for every election out there and secure themselves some campaign funding. Now, you might say, this sounds simple to solve. Just throw these fraudulent candidates in jail, and yeah, sure, I suppose that could work. But no great government in history relied on throwing political candidates in prison in order to run proper elections. Yeah, the optics of that would be awful.
So why haven't there been think tanks coming up with great alternatives to political financing? Well, think tanks are legitimately some of the most powerful organizations you have never heard of.
They play a key role in influencing local, state, national, and even global policy by hiring the smartest people in the world and paying them huge salaries to argue their point of view into the ears of people with power. Some of the big think tanks in America have more power over legislation than our elected officials, and have become so integrated into the political process that Washington would grind to a halt without them. It's easy to see why people believe that think tanks are shadowy organizations pulling the strings of power, while insiders claim that they are just a cog in the machine keeping democracy intact. But what the f do these organizations actually do? Politicians create laws in so many diverse fields that it's literally impossible for them to actually understand most of it. If you woke up one day and found yourself elected to Congress, then you are going to need to review bills that get introduced so you can make an informed decision to pass or block it. If that law proposes a parts per million limitation on nitrates in aerial dispersed fertilizers on farms receiving USDA agricultural risk coverage subsidies, then well, unless you are a farmer or a chemist, you probably have no idea what the f any of that actually means. Most politicians are not experts in the fields they are legislating. In theory, a think tank is a nonprofit entity that does employ experts for times just like this. An agriculture or chemical supply think tank will have highly experienced farmers and chemists on staff to advise lawmakers on matters just like this. They do this by producing lots of studies, surveys, and collecting stacks of data about everything in their field, which can be an expensive process. Ask any career academic or scientist, and you will learn that a lot of their time is spent writing proposals just to get the funding to conduct their real studies. Think tanks handle that for them, allowing their scientists, economists, sociologists, and sector experts to create reports without the budget constraints of normal research. They also do their job by just being a friendly service that lawmakers can call up if they need their questions answered about a certain issue, or talking points for an upcoming debate. It can be a great opportunity for scientists, and a great tool for a politician. But the money still has to be coming from somewhere. Nobody is spending billions of dollars every year for research just because they are interested in community-led data infrastructure or the congestion benefits of e-scooters. These anonymous donors want to see a return on their investment, and the growing amount of money going towards these institutions suggests they are getting it. According to MIT, there are over 800 think tanks operating in America today, and according to KAS, the number of think tanks operating in America has increased by 58% in just the past 25 years. Nowadays, there really is a think tank for just about anything that laws can be made for. So, politicians are just a phone call away from someone who can help them understand what they are going to pass into law. If this is done properly, then think tanks can pass better laws than if elected officials were just Googling or guessing the pros and cons of the bills before them. But when the men and women who decide how the country is being run rely on unelected experts getting huge salaries from somewhere, you already know that there is going to be bad outcomes. But I am here to tell you that it's even worse than you think. So it's time to learn how money works to find out what the fuck think tanks actually do. Some think tanks operate as semi-independent government agencies, like the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, but most have nothing officially to do with the government at all. Funding for most of these think tanks comes primarily from companies in the industries they represent, but it doesn't stop there. Donating millions of dollars to political campaigns to influence policy is arguably a bit too easy in America. But there are still rules, and major donations are still public record. Donations to think tanks are treated no differently than donations to any other 501c nonprofit organization, like the Red Cross or Doctors Without Borders, which means any amount of money can be given with complete anonymity, and anybody can give money. A report by the Foreign Influence Transparency Initiative at the Center for International Policy found that foreign governments donated at least $175 million to the top 50 Washington think tanks between 2014 and 2018. The report stressed that this number was the minimum, and the real number could be as high as $500 million to just these top 50 organizations, but accessing these donation records was made intentionally difficult. Oh, and yes, in case you were wondering, the Center for International Policy is also a think tank. Now, businesses and governments are only spending this money because think tanks are shockingly effective at getting favorable laws passed for their donors. If you are a major industry leader that needs the government on your side, you will quickly find out that political lobbying has become a highly competitive game, and just making big donations to election campaigns is not enough to get favorable laws passed. Unfortunately for you, voters still have some power over the government. So, you need to ensure that your fundraised politicians also have the right talking points. If a think tank produces a report that won't support the political argument of a business benefactor, they are under no obligation to publish it.
They can also adjust their reporting methods as much as they want until they get a result that supports their argument without the oversight of peer review. If you are a morally dubious venture capitalist with big investments in e-scooter rental companies, then throwing a few $100,000 towards something like the Adam Smith Institute to produce a report on how e-scooters will save lives, bus congestion, and help the environment, it will be immensely useful to you. If a city decides they want to ban your scooter company because people are sick of inexperienced riders dangerously crowding sidewalks and dumping scooters directly into local waterways, then you can use this report to push your agenda. In a political debate, your side will be able to wheel out the study as proof of all the good e-scooters are doing, and your politicians can attack the opposition by asking them for data and evidence that they probably won't have. You can win even the most unreasonable debates if your side is the only one that can afford to make evidence. Conducting research like this is expensive, and the side with the profit motive can produce a lot more data than the side of public interest. But that problem is nothing compared to what think tank research has been used to argue for. The link between smoking and cancer, sugar and obesity, CO2 and climate change, and military spending has all been subverted thanks to think tank research over the decades to delay regulations coming down on harmful industries. A leaked correspondence between tobacco executives and a public health think tank accidentally said the quiet part out loud. Doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public. Biased reporting like this is highly effective at slowing down any political change that would cut into profit. The influence that think tanks have is only ever really challenged when they go up against other think tanks. Just so this video doesn't get too depressing, I want to tell you about a funny little battle that is being had for the hearts and minds of our politicians right now. On one side are the pharmaceutical companies producing Ozempic and its alternatives, an appetite suppressant that could be highly profitable for these companies if they are allowed to prescribe it to people to combat obesity. The public health think tanks on the side of Big Pharma are producing reports about the benefits of losing weight for individuals and the healthcare system itself. They have also started advocating that this medicine should be covered by insurance because it will decrease the lifetime cost of medical care. However, the fast food, soda, and snack companies are looking at Ozempic as a threat that could take away their biggest customers. So, they are getting their think tanks to publish just as many articles about the unknown health risks of lifelong medication. When the product is uncertainty, no claim is too wild. A 2018 report by the Journal of Public Choice found that think tanks with more extreme leanings on both sides of the political aisle were more likely to be cited in floor speeches in Congress. But wait, it gets worse. Bending the truth in the name of profit at the expense of public health and safety isn't even the strangest things these organizations get up to. The Research and Development, or RAND Corporation, is one of the largest and best funded think tanks in the world. According to its own data, it received nearly $360 million in 2022 from donors like the US military, the Department of Homeland Security, and other governments, charities, and donors. The RAND Corporation and its subsidiaries like the Hudson Institute produce policy advice for international affairs, and it has been directly involved in things like the space race, the Vietnam War, national healthcare, and nuclear strategy. The Cold War was dictated by a policy known as mutually assured destruction. The theory was that both sides had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the other several times over so nobody would shoot first, because they would also secure their own fate when the other side returned fire. This idea was not created by the military. It was coined by a researcher at the Hudson Institute, a division of the RAND Corporation, and they still publish research on managing nuclear escalations. The idea conveniently necessitated a huge military buildup to maintain the balance of global power. The military was facing slashed budgets after the end of the Second World War, but they saw an opportunity. Funding the kind of independent research done by the RAND Corporation that argued for a big military would let politicians justify expanding military budgets even during peacetime. Think tanks served as a way for the government to lobby the government. The RAND Corporation is just one example out of many. But wait, it gets even worse. Think tanks are technically non-profits, but that doesn't stop them from paying huge salaries to their staff. Since the role of think tanks is to consult on public policy, a lot of people they employ are people who have previously worked in the public sector. Think tank jobs are a cushy retirement plan for politicians, which is another reason why they are personally incentivized to work closely with them to make policy. But maybe the worst thing of all is simply how necessary they have made themselves. In a perfect world, politicians would just ask their constituents for advice on the issues they were legislating. Instead of relying on industry-funded researchers, they could just talk to the experts themselves. The book What Should Think Tanks Do by Andrew Seeley says that one of the key rules that modern think tanks do is draft legislation that politicians can try to pass into law.
Most politicians don't have the time, expertise, or resources to write effective bills, so they have just started to rely on the advice of these well-funded organizations to do their homework for them. The problem is that when governments outsource their thinking, it doesn't always help the average middle-class family do better in life. In fact, it seems like successive administrations are pretty much hollowing out the middle class. Most people think they are middle class, but most are not, and that's costing them a lot of money. This society-wide problem is made even worse because nobody knows what the fuck middle class even means anymore.
I feel like you're really just in between a rock and a hard place. You're in a spot where everyone's like, hey, you're doing better than, low class. You're doing great.
The wealth of our middle class has been ripped from their home and then redistributed all across the world.
He's trying to tell us he cares about the middle class. Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
And you're underneath the people who are actually doing fine.
You probably think middle class is what most people think middle class is. Not rich, but not poor. A middle class family can afford a regular home with a 30-year mortgage, 2 cars, and a vacation once a year. A middle class family has 2 people that work in middle management or run a small business. If they are lucky, you might imagine that one of the pair could stay home to look after the children. The middle class describes the largest share of people on the wealth spectrum slotted between the extremely wealthy and the working class. But you would find it impossible to give a net worth figure that is the cutoff for entry into any of these classes. There are 3 reasons why you are not middle class, and 3 reasons why this irrelevant definition is hurting your real financial situation. The first reason you are not middle class is because that term really doesn't mean anything anymore.
I was at a seminar recently where somebody literally said, there is no middle class anymore. The middle class is gone.
The middle class was first used in early modern Europe to describe the middling people that were not nobility, but not peasants either. They were wealthy merchants or factory owners. If you don't own a factory or a fleet of trade ships, you already fall outside the original definition of the middle class. Today, these people would be considered upper class, especially in America where we rejected the idea of nobility. The middle class is a changing classification, and that change is usually decided by the upper class. In early modern Europe, the nobles needed a way to class people that were as wealthy as they were, but not considered as important. Today, the middle class describes people that aren't nearly as rich as the upper class, which is the old middle class, but also aren't poor. It's a definition so broad that it's practically useless, but it has changed a lot in a short span of time. Homer Simpson was once portrayed as a working-class man. The show has a rigid adherence to episodic continuity, so the family has not changed at all in 33 years the show has been on air. The show may not have changed, but the world around it has. And slowly, the Simpsons family became middle class, then upper middle class. And today, with their single-family home, 3 children, 2 cars, and a stay-at-home wife, they could be considered upper class.
I don't know which I love more, being rich or hiding it from my husband.
The definition may be meaningless, but it's not useless. Everybody from companies to politicians target the middle class as the largest block of customers and voters.
This really will mostly benefit the middle class and jobs.
You probably like to think you are middle class even if you are not. People will place themselves into this group and accept that something that's good for the middle class is good for them. This is a very useful trait when chasing votes or marketing a product.
To middle-class Americans. That's all for the middle class.
A middle-class tax cut.
America's middle class is getting hollowed out.
Until middle-class incomes are going up again.
A system for classifying people based on their wealth that has remained consistent over time is simply dividing people into 2 groups, the working class and the upper class. The first group are people that need to work to pay their living expenses, the working class. The second group is those that don't need to work because they have enough income from investments or other payments. According to this definition, a doctor that still needs to work to pay the mortgage on their 7-bedroom McMansion is working class, but a retiree living on a pension would be upper class. The definitions are simpler, but the outcome is just as blurry. None of this would even matter if it wasn't costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of your career, and that's not hyperbole. So it's time to learn how money works to find out why social classes are stupid and only kept around as a useful tool to sell you stuff. The first problem with assuming you are middle class comes from the inherent spending and saving patterns it motivates. According to a study published by Bankrate, a financial services comparison and publishing company, 57% of Americans could not cover an unexpected $1,000 expense without taking on debt or selling something.
People were being forced to borrow from retirement savings take out a personal loan, put things on a credit card.
This study is published every year, and the number of Americans in such a fragile financial situation has been slowly climbing, even though the $1,000 is worth less than when the report was first produced. Even if your definition of middle class is different from all of the other definitions, we can all agree that having less than $1,000 in savings is not a trait associated with the middle class. A Gallup poll found that a majority of Americans still identify as middle class, which means that there is an overlap of people that can't afford a $1,000 expense but still consider themselves middle class. The idea of what a middle class American looks like is both the cause and effect of this. A survey conducted by Lending Club found that 36% of people earning at least $250,000 a year were living paycheck to paycheck.
We've struggled. I mean, we've gone from having money in the bank, having savings, to living paycheck to paycheck and basically trying to make ends meet, and sometimes they don't meet.
That income by most people's standards would put those people securely into the upper middle class, but they were still dealing with financial stress. A significant contributor to this financial stress was maintaining the image that people had of what an upper middle class lifestyle should look like. 2 cars, a well-furnished single-family home, and regular vacations are all part of an upper middle class income starter pack, but they are unaffordable in a lot of the areas that people work to make these high salaries. Here in San Francisco, that income would responsibly get you a 1-bedroom apartment and a basic car that you need to pay to keep locked up so that it doesn't get broken into. Those living conditions don't feel middle class though, so people overextend themselves because they think that if they earn what they think is a middle income salary, they should have a middle income lifestyle. This lifestyle assumption is the second way that thinking you are middle class is hurting your real financial situation. It makes you less likely to pick the right job. Some of the best job opportunities in America right now are roles that people associate with the working class. Trade jobs, trucking, farming, and oil work can all make more money than most white-collar jobs in an office. A lot of young people dismiss these careers as something they would only consider if they didn't make it into college, because they don't want to be working class even though they can make a lot more money and take on less debt pursuing one of these options.
Skilled laborers become more and more scarce, companies will become more desperate and out of necessity pay more. Also, the longer that you work in the trades, the more money you tend to make.
There are pros and cons to white-collar professional work and blue-collar trade jobs, but working your way up a corporate ladder is not as guaranteed as putting in some high-paying hours with a good trade. But too often, it's dismissed because people think they are better than that, when really, they are probably not. And that's because of the second reason you are not middle class. In a throwback to European nobility, that status is becoming hereditary. According to studies published by Georgetown University, Pew Research, and Harvard Business Review, the biggest predictor that a child will have financial stability in their adult lives is not their academic ability, but the wealth of their parents. Wealthier parents can provide better opportunities and remove financial burdens like paying out of pocket for college or saving for the down payment on a first home. Children of wealthier parents also have soft benefits that, according to research, can make a big difference. Just being surrounded by social networks of people that are also financially stable means that wealthier children are more likely to know the basics of building credit, saving for long-term financial goals, and avoiding common financial mistakes. Certain social studies have argued that this advantage goes even further. Children of wealthier parents have less to prove and are therefore less likely to spend recklessly on conspicuous consumption, and they are given learned social skills that help them perform well in a professional environment. Even if the child of wealthy parents doesn't end up in a high-paying career, they can still end up significantly ahead of those that do. Children from poorer households that break the cycle and earn a middle or upper middle class income are still going to need to catch up financially. These children will need to pay their own way through college by taking out student loans. They will need to buy their own car, build their own credit, save for their own down payment, and they will also be under more pressure to help improve the financial situation of their family. These people are overrepresented in the same group of high-income earners with very low financial security, and that's what causes the third problem with thinking you are middle class. It will make you take unnecessary risks. If people who believe they are middle class can't afford the trappings of what they consider a normal middle class lifestyle to look like, they might take on debt to keep up or look at risky alternatives to make money. Which group of people do you think are most likely to fall for financial scams? If you are brave enough, put your answer in the comment section so we can all make fun of you for being wrong. According to the FTC, elderly people trying to pay back the IRS and gift cards actually fell for scams at a lower rate than young professionals on above-average incomes. Younger adults were 330% more likely to fall for investment scams in particular.
Texting, snapping, messaging on social platforms, that's how they communicate. And scammers love that. right? They're on all of those platforms. They're on all of those networks.
Everybody wants to get rich quick, but people with high incomes who have still fallen behind what they think of as a middle-class income life need to get rich quick just to keep up. Any investment promising 100% annual returns is clearly a scam. But someone who thinks they ought to be middle class has the right combination of enough income and enough desperation to fall for these cons on the slim hope that they may work. Even less blatant scams are targeted exclusively towards people who they think should be further ahead in life because they are middle class. Let's test this out. Here, watch this ad. Now tell me honestly, was that ad someone trying to pitch you an Amazon automation, day trading, drop shipping, or real estate investing course? Or do you have AdBlock or YouTube Premium and are totally confused right now? If you are in the former group, it's because according to my own community poll, you are the prime target for wanting to make extra income to improve your financial situation. Even people who don't fall for scams or pay for shitty courses pitched by hustle bros are still more likely to have aggressive stock portfolios or partake in risky strategies like house flipping, options trading, or cryptocurrency investing. This financial anxiety can hurt you in more ways than taking more dumb risks. It also causes the fourth problem with thinking that you are middle class. It makes you less likely to take smart risks. Financial security has a lot of benefits. People that save more and spend less are happier, and having a middle-class job to pay for a middle-class life is about as secure as most people think it gets. The problem is that people get used to this imaginary safety and put themselves in quite risky financial situations to maintain it. A person who has been with their employer for a long time will feel secure in the role, even though multiple studies have found no correlation between time at a company and job security beyond probationary periods. The reason that people expect that they are more secure at a job they have been at longer is simply survivorship bias. If they haven't been laid off yet, they are less likely to be laid off at all, even if that is simply not true. Employees that stick with their employers for longer than 3 years at a time not only earn significantly less than their peers who move jobs more frequently, they also have less overall job security. Potential employers do value company loyalty, but they value a range of experience and flexibility to different situations more. Someone that has been with their former employer for decades is a red flag to hiring managers because they could be set in their ways and difficult to train on the unique processes that every company has. These calculated risks don't stop at moving jobs. They can also be moving to a new city with much better job opportunities, starting a business in a field they have experience in, or just asking their boss for a raise. Someone who is barely maintaining a middle-class lifestyle is less likely to take these calculated risks because they know that any complications could cause them to lose their facade very quickly. Now, the third reason that you think you are middle class is because the middle class and upper class are the groups most portrayed in the media. And while the availability bias might have you thinking that's true, it isn't going to help you to actually buy into the American dream by owning your own home. Fewer young people than ever are going to be able to buy a house in their lifetime, and at the same time, homes are getting more expensive every year. What? But if nobody can afford to buy a house, then how the fuck do they keep getting more expensive? A family home should be the bedrock of your financial life. It gives you somewhere to live while building up equity in a place that you can one day call your own. Owning a home with a 30-year mortgage is cheaper out of pocket every month in most cities than renting. So if you can buy your own home, you will be richer now and richer in the future. You already know this, but if you're in the 75% of my audience that doesn't own a home, it's probably because you can't afford one. According to a report by Redfin, only 21% of homes that went on sale in 2022 were considered affordable. That's down from 60% of homes that went on sale in 2021. That means in just 1 year, 2/3 of all affordable housing became too expensive for the average American. The team conducting this survey concluded that housing affordability is at its lowest point in history. But what's the endgame here? If people can't afford a home, then house prices can't go up anymore, right? Wrong. I don't want to make another one of those stupid finfluencer videos about how the housing market is going to crash in 3.5 days, but there are 3 reasons why it could get a lot worse before it gets better. The first reason is that houses do not need to be affordable for you to buy one. If you think that can't make sense, there is an entire industry working to make it true. You don't save money to buy a house. You save money for a down payment. Wages have not kept up with house prices, but a 20% down payment only grows at 1/5 the rate in absolute terms, so people are still able to get into the market. According to Zillow, the average home sold in America in 2020 traded for $230,000. At the start of 2023, the average home price was $330,000, a jump of $100,000 in less than 3 years. According to Forbes, the average American makes a salary of $59,000 before tax. After federal tax and FICA, that leaves them with a take-home of $49,000. If this average person saved a ridiculous 70% of their take-home pay to buy a house, they would be just as far away from their goal after 3 years because the price of the average house grew just as fast as their savings. The average home earns as much as the average person. But most people only save for a down payment, so 70% becomes 14% or 7% if it's a dual-income household where the other partner also earns the average salary. That's still a major savings commitment when 57% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 payment without taking on debt. 14% of your take-home pay should be more manageable than 70%. But remember, this is only how much you would need to save just to keep up with price increases. This doesn't actually get you any closer to your goal of buying a home. Lenders and banks with a vested interest in real estate assets across the country know that it is still hard for most families who also need to pay for food, rent, and other essentials that are outpacing wages. So they have moved the goalposts. A report by the National Association of Realtors found that the average down payment for a first-time homebuyer was just 7%, and the average down payment for a repeat purchaser that has had time to build equity in their previous home was only 17%. If you only need to put a tiny deposit down, house prices can increase to many multiples of your income before it becomes impossible to buy a house. If you only need to save for a 7% down payment, then just a 10% savings rate over 3 years from an average wage would get you into an average house. You would be more disciplined than the average American, but it's not impossible with some sacrifice. If that's still too hard for you, then Zillow recently announced that they would be trialing a 1% down payment loan product to help people that couldn't save any money make the biggest financial commitment of their lives.
Here's how it works. The buyer pays a down payment of 1%, and then Zillow makes an additional contribution of 2% at closing. That is a grant and doesn't need to be paid back.
So even though houses are making more money than you are, the price of entry is being reduced just as fast. But that's only to make the down payment. You still need to make the repayments, and if you can't put 20% down, what hope do you have of making repayments on a house? Well, it's time to learn how money works to find out if the circus really can go on forever. The second way that houses can keep on getting more expensive even when nobody can afford to buy them is because nobody is selling them.
But we also don't have anyone putting their home on the market just because they have a 30-year fixed rate below 3%. So nobody wants to sell a home right now, and there's still plenty of people who want to move.
Home sales in America are at their lowest level in a decade despite population growth. According to data from the National Association of Realtors, 6 million homes were sold in 2021. But now, only 4 million homes are selling at an annualized rate. Potential sellers with a home loan don't want to sell, because the rental market is even more unaffordable. And if they move into a new home, they will get a new home loan that has a much higher rate than what they are paying currently. Many people already moved during COVID, and another move so quickly would be too disruptive on their social and family lives, in addition to the significant interest expense of new home loans. The average homeowner spends 13.2 years in their home. After a flurry of home buying activity in the last 3 years, more Americans than ever are just settling into their new home, and they have longer than ever before they consider selling. New buyers are also choosing to wait out their purchases until interest rates drop. The average number of people living in a household also increased recently for the first time in 160 years after a long trend of smaller families and people choosing to move out into their own homes. According to Pew Research that published this report, this was because more younger adults were choosing to, or being forced, to live with their parents for longer to avoid living in an unaffordable housing market. The market is still active, but regular buyers and regular sellers are choosing to sit out until moving into a new home becomes more affordable. And it's the people who are left that are the third reason this can keep going on longer than you think. There are 3 groups still in the game. The first group are all cash buyers that have money from selling their old home and want to buy a new one. If you are a boomer that purchased their home in the 1970s for 3 nickels and you now want to downsize, now is an ideal time to take advantage of the market. When prices are higher, the spread between a single-family freestanding home and a smaller property is larger, giving you more cash to live off of. The second group are people moving interstate. Unaffordable housing is pushing people out of expensive cities across the country. You would probably prefer to stay in your home city even if you had a job that you could do from anywhere. Closeness to friends, family, and familiar amenities is why people only live 18 miles from their hometown on average. In defiance of the part-time hedge fund manager and full-time YouTube comedian Patrick Boyle,
where should my friend How Money Works live? I don't know, maybe Dubai. He's one of those flashy YouTuber types. He probably wants to live on one of those Palm Islands, hang out at malls buying designer goods, and maybe do some indoor skiing. That's just the kind of guy he is.
I chose to stay in my crappy one-bedroom San Francisco apartment because moving is a pain in the ass. But if you are really struggling to afford a high cost of living city, you can improve your lifestyle by moving to cheaper cities with lower rents and property prices. If you move from a city like San Francisco, Seattle, or New York to any other city in the country, you are going to be able to buy a lot more house for the same money. Your higher income from working in these areas will push up local prices, and in the process of avoiding the rising home prices, you have just made it worse.
And therefore you have more people competing for rental space because the cooling of housing market has kept people longer in rental tenure. So that is the reason why competition has increased. The supply has been constrained because people are not moving from rental to owner.
The third group are investors. Investors only care about the return on their assets. Prices are high right now, and investors using financing to buy property are also paying higher interest rates, but in return, they are charging higher rents to long-term tenants and short-term vacationers if they list their properties on sites like Airbnb.
Make no mistake, prices are still too high.
The largest increase in home buying has come from this group. According to Redfin, year-on-year growth in investment purchases reached 145% in 2022, and institutional investors buying up stock for real estate investment trusts were the fastest growing group of investors. Real estate investment trusts, or REITs, work like index funds for real estate. They buy a portfolio of properties using money collected from a large group of investors. REITs are sold both over-the-counter through companies like Blackstone for high-net-worth investors or as exchange-listed securities for average people. REITs used to focus on commercial real estate like shopping malls, hotels, warehouses, office buildings, and farmland. The high cost of these properties made them suitable for sharing between multiple investors. Residential REITs have experienced a sharp rise in popularity, though, because people that can't afford to buy a home themselves still want exposure to this market. Some people are putting savings towards a down payment into REITs because they should provide returns consistent with the residential real estate market so their savings won't be left behind by rising house prices. The popularity of this asset class has been caused by unaffordable housing, and it's also made housing more unaffordable. But this can't last forever.
This is the worst!
And as much as I hate to say it, those stupid fucking finfluencer thumbnails may be right. Things are starting to change.
This is why the market is largely resisted to sell off and why it's still possible for home prices to go even higher, even though it kind of makes no sense.
An updated Redfin report has revealed that investor purchases have slowed significantly, and surveys from local agents in cities like Las Vegas, Austin, Miami, and Houston revealed that institutional purchases have stopped completely. The private equity company Blackstone, not to be confused with the investment index company BlackRock, had to block investor withdrawals from its $71 billion earlier this year, sparking concerns that the whole system was overvalued. If investors pull their money from these trusts too quickly, the investment managers, in this case Blackstone, will be forced to sell one of their properties in their portfolio. BlackRock was accused of overestimating the price of the properties it had in its portfolio, but that's hard to prove until it's forced to sell one of them. But as soon as just one property needs to be sold, all other comparable properties in that trust need to be readjusted to a similar value. A sharp drop in the value of the trust could trigger more investors to withdraw their funds, causing the manager to sell more properties, pushing down prices even further. But don't get your hopes up too much. If you own shares in a REIT, the easiest way for you to liquidate your position would be to sell your shares to another investor, which doesn't require any cash to be liquidated from the assets themselves. The bonus fourth reason is that wealthy families are just doing a better job of holding onto more properties for themselves. In the past, family wealth struggled to get past the first two generations, but now that investing has become so easy and lucrative, we might be starting to live in a new age of nobility where family dynasties can last centuries. One of the ways they are maintaining the illusion is by pushing the idea that everyone, everywhere, can be an entrepreneur, which is actually harming all of us. Despite job market uncertainties and rising interest rates, more people than ever believe now is the right time to start a business. The pressure from online thought leaders has pushed the narrative that trying to start a business has never been easier, never been more profitable, and even if you fail, you will be right back to where you started anyway. In a survey conducted by the HR and payroll platform Gusto, 1,600 new entrepreneurs were questioned about their motivations for starting a business. Being burned out at work and feeling the pain of inflation were the top responses. This is a dangerous trend that will leave most new business owners worse off than when they started, but entrepreneurship is still promoted as something that is a responsible way to fix these problems. Unsurprisingly, that's causing three big issues that will be costing you money, even if you aren't personally on your #grindset yet. The first problem is that most people simply suck at business. The largest demographic increase in new business owners was young people between 18 and 35. According to a study by the Harvard Business Review using U.S. Census Bureau data, the average age of a successful startup founder at the time of launching their company was 42 years old. Founders below the age of 30 had a significantly higher rate of failure, and yet the top Google suggestion below this article was, is it too late to start a business after 30? A founder's experience and industry connections will play a big part in a new business's success. Between 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 startups fail within the first year, but there are some businesses that started by people with decades of industry experience that are almost guaranteed to be successful. A well-respected expert with a long list of clients that they can bring into their new business on day one will have a much higher likelihood of success than someone who started a business because they wanted to be their own boss and make a lot of money. Experts going into business for themselves to provide a service in a field they have worked in for decades represents a significant portion of new businesses, so that means that people that just want to be business people doing business things are going to have even worse odds. Businesses in trendy fields like tech, e-commerce, hospitality, and fashion have a significantly higher failure rate than finance, construction, and healthcare, where business owners are required to have industry experience and accreditations before they are even allowed to start operating. But if you are thinking about starting a business, you probably already know about the failure rate, and you are still wanting to give it a go either because you do have a solid business plan or because every piece of media has told you how amazing business owners are. What you might not know is why it's so important that you think this way. The first reason why you subconsciously believe that you should be trying to start a business is that hustle bros are pushing you products that make starting a business look easy, but it's not. There is nothing wrong with companies marketing a competitive service to people who are in the market for that service. It only becomes dangerous when people are encouraged to enter the market when they find they had no intention to start a business in the first place. Everybody from boss babe MLM marketing to political campaigns hinge on making small business owners feel special, and those who aren't feel like they should be starting their business right now. People are willing to spend a lot of money on products that they think are going to help them start or improve their business, so companies want to push as many people into that market as possible. This market is highly lucrative and highly competitive. According to a 2021 study by the market data firm Straits Research, this market was worth $1.48 trillion in 2021, and is projected to be worth $8 trillion by 2030. These services typically have high margins in customers to keep their services for a long time because it becomes integral to their business operations, and the cost and downtime required to switch to a competitor just isn't worth it. The biggest barrier to these businesses is getting new customers into their service. Cloud storage and web hosting, for example, is a huge market dominated by 3 players: Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. Signing up big customers to these services is still handled by old-school sales managers, who will earn a commission for every new client they sign up. That combination of technical skills and interpersonal sales ability means that top-performing reps can earn more than $1 million a year in commission. All of these companies have also invested millions into data storage devices to make migrating from one service to another as painless as possible for the few companies that do want to make the switch to a competitor. Amazon even has a data center on wheels that can hold up to 100 petabytes of data to migrate a company's storage to one of their data centers because it's faster to drive that much data across the country than it is to send it over the internet. It's a big business with big expenses, but it has equally big rewards for securing new clients. Although, it's a lot easier to just get new clients right as they start their business. Even if the deals are smaller, some of those companies grow. So a broad approach to potential new customers is a cost-effective way to onboard big customers in the future. Companies know if they provide a decent service at a fair price, most businesses are unlikely to switch over, so they will have a customer for life. Targeting people before they even start a business is a cheaper customer acquisition method than going after existing customers from competitors, but this whole system relies on making it look appealing to start a business that would use the company's products. Now, this is a perfectly legitimate marketing strategy carried out by perfectly legitimate companies with great products helping great businesses. But unfortunately, it has also been taken too far by hustle bros with a course to sell you on starting your own business. They have changed the well-crafted narrative from starting a business is a risk you should consider to if you don't start a business right now, you're a loser that's going to work a 9-to-5 their whole life. It's okay if you don't want to start your own business, and it's probably a good idea not to if you have to rely on a course to learn how to get started, which is the second problem with America's obsession with entrepreneurship. Starting a business comes first, solving a problem comes second. How many people do you think get listed every year on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list? Well, I don't know what your answer was because this is a video, but you're probably wrong because it's 600. The nonsensical naming convention is far from the worst problem with the list, with a suspicious number of former awardees ending up in prison for fraud. Sam Bankman-Fried, Caroline Ellison, Martin Shkreli, Do Kwon, and Charlie Javis have all at one point been featured on this prestigious list celebrating their entrepreneurship, and all subsequently ended up in prison. The one and only Patrick Boyle covered this recently, and it highlights a larger problem that young people are being encouraged, celebrated, and rewarded for starting businesses, even if those businesses make no sense.
A lot of the winners, in fact, often the ones that seemed most impressive at the time, seem to end up going to prison.
People, especially young people, want to start a business without having the life experience to have seen industry problems that could be solved in a marketable way. There are always exceptions, but someone is much more likely to find a profitable solution to a problem if they have been dealing with that problem for their entire career. Gary Tan is the CEO of Y Combinator, a startup incubator that gives seed investments to very early stage startups and also provides training to new entrepreneurs on how to run a business and how to find further investors. Tan has frequently said that the best way to start a business is to work in an industry you're interested in, get paid to learn about that industry, find a problem, and then leave to solve that problem. Y Combinator's business model only works when people are creating new businesses, so this advice goes against his best interest, which is why exactly you should listen to it. The overly competitive state of venture capital has meant that even bad ideas get funded if the founders fit the mold of a disruptive creator that can be marketed effectively to further investors. Fake it till you make it is a popular expression, but honestly terrible business advice. A growing list of bad companies have changed, faking it until they make it, to fake it until they can drop it to the next group of investors with no intention of ever making anything in particular. Even businesses that don't fall in the sights of venture capitalists have the same problems on a smaller scale. People want to start a business, and they see that dropshipping or digital marketing could make it possible without considering what value, if any, they are providing to their market. If you want to start a business, a good sign is if you can't believe that nobody has ever thought of your idea before. A bad sign is if you are taking someone else's idea because it looks like it made them a lot of money. Or even worse, they told you it made them a lot of money. With those problems in mind, the second reason so many people still want to start their own business is because modern corporate jobs are highly demanding and being your own boss is sold as a way to take back control of your life. Work-life balance is extremely important, and it's a big reason I quit investment banking to become a full-time YouTuber, much to the disappointment of my parents. But for most people, starting a business is going to mean much less free time. A survey by the publication Inc. of American small business owners found that the majority of them worked at least 50 hours a week, with 25% working more than 60 hours a week. Additionally, 70% of respondents say they had worked weekends on a regular basis. Once a business is at scale, an effective founder can slowly offload responsibilities, but that is an incredibly difficult process at a stage that most businesses never get to. Business owners may not answer to a boss, but they answer to their customers, their own staff, business regulators, and suppliers. If you decide to go into business for yourself, you will also have more personal investment in your job. If you want to take a break from a normal job, you may be able to organize vacation days, or you can simply quit and find a new job. It's a big decision, but you will only miss out on income. It won't directly cost you a major investment. If you run your own business, taking a break means shutting the business down until you get back, if it can be restarted at all. The final problem with the cultural obsession with entrepreneurship is that it is used as an excuse to gloss over a lot of bad practices in the name of progress. Some of the fraudulent businesses that were started by entrepreneurs that just wanted to be big business people doing big business people things have cost investors and clients billions of dollars. Others have put people's health at risk, and others have been reckless to the point of being deadly. Move fast and break things is another common expression amongst dumb startup founders. It's a term borrowed from programming where the best way to test something is to throw code together until it breaks and fix what went wrong. The phrase is an internal motto for the early days of Facebook, and it was an inside joke amongst developers to talk about shitty code that still did the job. Facebook itself changed this motto in 2014 to move fast with sustainable infrastructure, but the damage has been done. Now, everybody that fancies themselves the next visionary sees rules and regulations as nothing more than obstacles to be skirted around. It's barely acceptable practice for a tech company where the worst thing that can happen is service outages, but it's criminal behavior when it involves people's livelihood or their health and safety. Theranos, OceanGate, and FTX are just the failures we have heard about, but our obsession with entrepreneurship has let stuff like this happen for far too long. And although most of us are aware of these kinds of problems in tech startups, the agricultural sector is often overlooked. Industry groups have been pointing out that most agriculture in America is still done on family farms, which is technically true, but also a convenient lie at the same time. According to the latest data released from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 86% of farms operating in America were classified as small family farms. However, This number includes so many insignificant examples that it's basically insignificant itself. According to the USDA's reporting criteria, a small family farm is an operation that generates less than $350,000 in a year, but makes more than $1,000 a year. The hurdle to classify as a farm is so low that things like Christmas tree lots and even large vegetable gardens at farmers markets get included in the total count of small family farms. All of these small farms collectively only account for 41% of total land area and 17% of total production. The vast majority of agricultural production is actually done by large-scale family farms that are multi-million-dollar operations, the same as any other large family-owned corporation. There's also a rapidly growing share of institutional farms owned by investment firms. The difference between this composition and this composition is actually part of what makes farmland such an attractive investment class. Now, this is really important to remember when seeing news about town halls full of struggling small-time farmers asking for assistance. It's not that their struggles are not real. They are getting crushed. But it's just that the imagery of lots of small working-class farmers going out of business is a really effective marketing tool for industry lobbying.
If there's no emergency funding this year, there will be 1 out of 3 farmers will file bankruptcy.
People don't care if Old McDonald's Incorporated Real Estate Investment Trust has a bad quarter. But those same companies are banking on the fact that politicians do care about the optics of thousands of family farms closing down. And since that's technically the majority of the industry, the big players can always count on government support coming through. Ultimately, most of the benefits of that lobbying will flow to the largest producers, which are not the same people currently voicing their concerns in town hall meetings. If anything, the industry giants will probably use this financial relief to further consolidate this industry, making it even harder on these guys. Oh, and of course, some of you are probably already pointing out that even these small family farmers are not faultless either, and we will get to that later. But first, it's important to understand the 4 major problems all hitting agriculture at the same time right now. The first big problem is probably what you are already thinking: the trade wars. Every year, around 20% of the food we grow is sold abroad to markets mainly in Canada, Mexico, and China, the same countries that we have been pushing hard with trade wars. America is the world leader in agricultural trade, and countries are highly dependent on these exports to feed their own agriculture, but more importantly, their own people. There is a lot of bluff and bluster when it comes to hammering out the exact details of these trade agreements, and honestly, a lot of it is just political theater. Behind the scenes, they are willing to go back and forth on things like consumer goods and cars to secure a good photo op. But if there is one thing that these governments absolutely will not fuck around with, it is making sure their people get fed. There is an old adage that even the most stable empires are only 3 missed meals away from chaos, and most world leaders understand this deeply. If they want to keep their jobs, and probably their heads, they need to make sure that their people are fed. Because of this, almost every country that is reliant on food imports from America has made major investments into finding alternatives as quickly as possible. China is typically the largest international purchaser of American soybeans, which it uses primarily for domestic livestock feed. But this year, it hasn't purchased a single bean. Instead, it's strengthened trade ties with Brazil, and it's accepting the slightly higher price of their soy over ours. What makes this especially hard is that harvests need to be planned months in advance, and global trade dynamics are changing faster than fields can grow. Now, this would make things incredibly difficult for commodity farmers at the best of times, but America actually has a lot of programs in place to ensure some level of stability in this market, or at least, we did. A report by Bloomberg Law found that the biggest cause of the current wave of bankruptcies is frozen government programs that farmers were counting on for their continued operations. In total, dozens of programs have been frozen, with individual operators reporting that they already made the investments to qualify for these grants, and only after the work was done are they being taken away. According to the industry group NSAC, over 30,000 contracts in total are being withheld indefinitely. This alone is not great, but it gets worse. This wasn't a cost-cutting measure. Government funding for farms is actually increasing with a range of new incentives. The only problem is, those programs start next year. So in the meantime, the current market is just filtering out the smaller farms that can't wait that long. And of course, on top of that, there is still the elephant in the room that these current problems are exactly what a majority of these farmers voted for. So a lot of people have been quick to point out that the current farming crisis might just be another example of people voting against their own best interests. The current administration didn't exactly hide their intentions to pursue tariffs and cut government programs during their election campaign. And yet, farming-dependent counties overwhelmingly supported them. So maybe they shouldn't exactly be shocked Pikachu in response to these problems. This is especially true for the third big challenge they are facing: which is that they are running out of workers. A report by the Economic Policy Institute found that 70% of all investigations into the agricultural industry detected violations in wage and hour laws. Labor-intensive farm work like hand harvesting is almost always conducted by contractors since they are only needed when there is an actual harvest to be picked. These contracts frequently pay based on output rather than total hours worked, which means it is very easy for these independent contractors to make less than minimum wage for their work. This can be really hard to police, because legitimate small contracting businesses or freelancers don't have the legal right to earn a set amount of money for a set amount of hours worked. A plumber who runs their own small business can easily end up doing hours of work where they earn below minimum wage, so an independent laborer picking fruit can be treated the same way. The economic realities test to make distinctions between these two circumstances is hard and often has to go to the courts, which is obviously very difficult for a lot of these groups. At the end of the day though, the results are probably not exactly shocking to you. Young Americans are not exactly lining up to do hard labor in the sun for hours a day, all to make below minimum wage. But now, with heightened immigration enforcement, farmers are also finding it harder to rely on undocumented workers who have typically been more willing to accept these unfavorable conditions. According to the Economic Policy Institute, these enforcement activities were briefly paused in response to pushback but are currently still in full swing. Again, no matter where you stand on these issues, you can't exactly argue that the current administration was trying to hide their intentions with these plans. So then, why did this industry vote against its own interests? Well, it probably wasn't as simple as that. Most farmers that are still around today are quite wealthy. In a lot of regions, they are making far more from the appreciating values of their land than they are from the crops that they grow on that land. According to a report by the USDA, croplands have increased in value by an average of $270 per acre within the last 12 months, while the actual top-line revenue from that same acre only averaged out to $205 an acre before any costs or expenses. This has slowly changed the industry of farming from a business of making food to a business of land speculation with a side hustle in government food programs. A first-hand account posted by Sarah Tabor explained this from personal experience working in the industry and proposing policy. If you haven't already seen it, I will leave a link to it below, because she obviously has more personal experience with the issues. But in brief, certain policies like tax cuts and increased benefits were more attractive to these business owners than the fear of genuine economic repercussions. The Big Beautiful Bill actually significantly increased government spending on farming assistance over the next 10 years by $56 billion, which will mostly go towards boosting government reference prices and insurance assistance. The current problem is that those new rules don't officially start until next year, while farmers are dealing with the immediate problems right now. This is why so many in the industry are asking for short-term support, because if they can survive to next year, things should get a lot more financially rewarding. Another component of recent tax changes that were particularly appealing to farmers were new capital gains tax brackets and deferrals on the sale of farmland, which could all significantly reduce how much they owed if they sold off their rapidly appreciating land. Now, I really don't want to get conspiratorial here, so you should know that this next part might just be a happy little accident. However, these new tax policies also pair really well with the emerging fintech platforms like AcreTrader, Farm Together, and Farmfolio, which let farmers sell portions of their land to outside investors who themselves can build up a diversified portfolio of different agricultural production. These platforms have raised a lot of money from people who themselves are also large investors in farmland as a financial asset, and also people who have a significant influence in shaping these policies. How much they actually use that power for their own self-interest is up to you to decide. But it gets worse. According to the Government Accountability Office, just 7% of farmers received 63% of all the financial assistance between 2019 and 2023. Increased assistance and consolidation will only make this statistic even more skewed by disproportionately benefiting larger consolidated farm operations. These larger farms simultaneously have greater financial stability to survive through tough times and benefit more during the good times. If you see news footage covering this farming crisis, you are going to see barns full of small farmers talking about their struggles. But that's not the agricultural industry. That's what the agricultural industry was. Most government programs intended to help out the idealized small family farmer end up helping out big agricultural businesses even more. The few actual small family farms that are still holding on are inevitably going to find it hard to compete with these kinds of market dynamics, but their struggles are a really good way to keep those benefits coming. There is an excerpt in the book Catch-22 that has become popular in response to this evolving crisis. His specialty was alfalfa. He made a good thing out of not growing any. The government paid him well for every bushel of alfalfa he did not grow. The more alfalfa he did not grow, the more money the government gave him. And he spent every penny he didn't earn on new land to increase the amount of alfalfa he did not produce. Major Major's father worked without rest in not growing alfalfa. Major Major's father was an outspoken champion of economy and government, provided it did not interfere with the sacred duty of government to pay farmers as much as they could get for all the alfalfa they produced. Now, this book was originally published in 1961 and is about the events of the Second World War, but you can probably see the relevance it has today. Now, these perverse incentives may be bad, but it gets worse. An industry-wide crisis like this just becomes a buying opportunity for investors with spare capital. A lot of genuine family farmers are seeing the ideal tax policies as a convenient time to hang up the hat and get out while they can. And then by the time support comes through to fix the industry, the biggest operators are the ones that will receive the support. According to census data, there are already 10% fewer farms than there were just 5 years ago when we were facing a similar crisis. If the farmers themselves are to be believed, there is a good chance that there will be even fewer in another 5 years from now. Larger, more institutional farms can also afford to spend more on lobbying, which is why they have slowly become one of the best funded voices in Washington. But go and watch this extended cut video next on what may or may not happen once the boomers who control all of this lobbying power, expire. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.